Alice Gao. I'm a New York City-based photographer. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've been in New York for the past 11 years or so. I typically shoot still life, interiors, and travel. Obviously, travel has not been a huge part of my life this past year, so I've really had to find inspiration elsewhere since travel was such a big source for me before. And I've really had to find inspiration in my own home because I do shoot a lot at home now. Today I'm actually going to walk you through some of the things I think about when composing a still life shoot at home. I'm going to shoot a little food scene and answer some of the questions that you guys have posed about still life photography and food photography. I'm really excited to be partnering with Nespresso for their Nespresso Editions IGTV series. They have featured a bunch of other creatives in various fields, and our hope is to just share inspiration, spread a little joy, and maybe inspire you to also create. One of the questions I got asked is, what is my creative process like for still life photography? And I think it can really vary. I think a lot of times it is very spur of the moment and serendipitous, and I don't plan out a shot at all. I just see a really beautiful patch of light, or there's like a nice setup of objects on my dresser or something, and I just feel inspired to shoot it. Other times it is much more planned and thought out, and maybe there's a mood board, there's a concept, there's a shot list. And for those, if I'm making the mood board, I try to really make it have a point of view and for it to be obvious what the intention and the concept is. Maybe there's a very specific color palette, or just like maybe it's like super graphic and minimal. So I take into account my mood board when I'm looking for props and for set design things, and since I am shooting at home by myself, I would also be sourcing the props myself. I love ceramics. I've been collecting ceramics for many years, especially on my travels, and I love ceramics with really great matte textures or like moon-like, like holes and all of that good stuff. So for this shoot, I thought those ceramics would pair really nicely with the golden and brown tones of pastries. I really wanted to have like a very lush and indulgent pastry scene for this shot. So that's more or less how I started this shoot. And then I got into other things like lighting and composition. Speaking of lighting, another question I got asked was, what is my ideal lighting setup for a food still life? And for me, I mean, lighting is very personal, but my ideal is always a very hard, directional sun, basically. Like I'm just trying to mimic a 3 p.m. summer sun, and that means very hard defined shadows, and I like it to come from the side, so I don't want it directly on top of my food or my scene. I want it to be, maybe from the back of the scene. And that's where I typically start. If the food or the products are not looking good with this light, then maybe I'll make adjustments and maybe add some diffusion to soften the light. But I do typically like a stronger shadow. I don't mind if it gets kind of dark, actually. I like the moodiness of it. And then I might lighten the shadows a little bit with a bit of fill, but typically this is my starting point. Another question I received is, how do I create balance in the composition? I think we can look at this rough starting point to try and help answer that question. For balance, I'm looking at negative space, I'm looking at the spacing in between the objects, and a few things that I notice are immediately that this cup and this plate have a strange amount of space between them. They're like barely touching, so I would want to either make them overlap or pull them further away. I'm also seeing that there's kind of a diagonal line here, and I don't love that, so I would also kind of just, zhuzh that around and make a more organic shape there. I am seeing that this feels a little bit busy and clustered on the left here, so I will probably rearrange that. I also do like having things, cropped out, or, if I do have a surface, having a plate that sits off of it. It just feels a little, it's nice to have something break the surface. I'm also looking at, I do have some light plates and some dark plates, and I wanted to make sure that they were not all all the light plates weren't clustered in one and all the dark plates weren't clustered in a corner. So is there a good balance with that? And so once I look at those things, I will make a few additional adjustments and then take another photo and, you know, see where I am. Sorry, needed a little pick-me-up. This next question I really love. It is, how are shadows an essential part of my work? And I love it because I love shadows, and I think that shadows can really be part of the composition, and they can also really tell your viewer where to look, because you can put parts of your scene in shadow to really highlight your main hero product. So I like to use black poster board and foam core and create shadows where there aren't shadows to begin with. I like creating just kind of these slants of shadows across my work, so that just to add like a little bit of extra something, a little idea that maybe you're in an environment or that there's a window nearby. Sometimes I also like to put things out of the scene that don't end up in the final composition, but their shadows will be in the composition. And sometimes it's to fill a negative space, or again, just to make it feel like there's something beyond the scene, beyond the little table set that I've created. Another question I received is, how do I decide what angles to shoot for composition's sake? And you know, for food, I really do think you're somewhat limited, because food does look best from either overhead, or if it's like a stacked dish, then maybe from a very low angle where you can see all the layers. So in this particular example, I am almost overhead. I am like not quite there, but I am at a pretty high angle, not so overhead that there's zero dimension in the products, but definitely nowhere near like eye level or 3/4. And part of that is just because these items look best that way, I think, and especially when I'm shooting like all these shallow plates, they get kind of wonky and distorted with angles that aren't more straight on and overhead. But if I were shooting, other subjects, then of course I would look around and play around for the best angle. I just think with food, things just look better from overhead. Someone asked, what are some basic tips for styling if you don't have a stylist on hand? And I'm not a professional stylist by any means, but I do have to style a lot for my at-home shoots or just when I'm playing around. And I think part of it is like having a great collection of items that you can already pull from, and this doesn't necessarily happen overnight. I've been collecting ceramics again for many, many years, and I love just slowly adding to it throughout my travels and just visiting my favorite home goods stores. But when you are pulling for a shoot, I think it's nice if they have some sort of cohesion, the items that you're pulling, so that you just know that like these things will look nice together. And it's nice to have a variety of sizes and textures and shapes, so that again you can create a more interesting and dynamic composition. And then I really think it's a lot of trial and error. So when I start my photo, I have no idea how I'm going to like actually style it. I like put everything down, and then I just start micro movements and rearranging. Then I take a shot, look at the photo, see what I have to move, and then I just continue to go from there. So I never really know where it's going to end up when I start my photo. Here we are at the final image. I have added the Nespresso at the very end because I wanted it to be as pristine as possible. Obviously, it's still very difficult to do both at a time, so I have one shot where the crema is great on this one, and then this one, it's great here. So I'm just gonna quickly combine them in Photoshop, which I already did here. Very simple because the camera never moved, I'm on a tripod. And here is the actual final image. And I hope you enjoyed that little glimpse into how I made this image. You may notice that I didn't really get into what equipment I'm using, and that's because I don't really think it's the most important thing here. I really think that you can create and capture beautiful moments with, your phone and just the available light or the sunlight. I actually love shooting with my phone. I think it's super convenient, it's always on me, and I just don't have to overthink it. So with that, I really hope that you'll be inspired to share your Nespresso coffee moment with me. And if you do, please hashtag Nespresso Editions and tag Nespresso and me so I can marvel at your beautiful photos. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.